Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. My name is Sarah Barnes Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain Blended, the secret society of supply chain. And I'm so excited to be collaborating once again with the great team at Opty Logic. We have Don on the show today, and Don was a guest on Let's Talk Supply Chain back in November last year, and we had a blast. Of course, we talked about Opty Logic and about technology, sustainability, risk, optimization, just some of the most important industry trends for 2024. But we also talked about bringing fun to supply chain, about not taking ourselves so seriously and embracing imagination in the world of supply chain design. It really was one memorable episode. So go and check it out if you missed it, Apple, Spotify, on our website. Now, something we also touched on during that episode was the inevitable trade-offs we have to make in business. And we're going to be diving deeper into that today. Because understanding the trade-offs you're going to have to make between cost, service, and risk when you're thinking about strategic supply chain decisions kind of is a must for boardroom discussions in 2024. And so that really is the crux of supply chain design, intelligently planned or planning an ecosystem that strikes just the right balance for your business. But of course, that requires technology. And so choosing a new technology comes with its own very real risk, right? The risk of the status quo versus the risk of a new partner. It's a common conundrum, but it's not one that you have to be conquered by. So today, Don and I are joined by Ryan of C.H. Robinson to talk about how they navigated this journey, the questions they asked, the strategies they used, and how Optilogic helped them to achieve supply chain design success. But we need to start with some introductions. So I want to welcome Don and Ryan. Before we start, I would like to ask you both to introduce yourself. Ryan, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go to Don.
Hi, thanks. Ryan Bischoff. I manage a team of supply chain engineers at C.H. Robinson. I have 28 years in supply chain, 23 of which are with C.H. Robinson. So thank you for the time.
Amazing. We've been in the industry almost the same amount of time. All right, Don, over to you.
Sure. My name's Don Hicks. I'm the CEO of Optilogic. Prior to this, I spent about 20 years working on a little company called LlamaSoft. And it is my pleasure to be here, Sarah, talking with you and with my friend Ryan.
Yeah, and you are passionate about supply chain design. So I can't wait to dive into this. So let's start by talking generally about what it actually means, what supply chain design means. So Don, let's start with you. Do you want to give us a quick introduction to supply chain design and what that means to you?
Sure thing. I'll answer it two ways, what it is and what it isn't.
Okay.
So supply chain design is the processes and activities involved with analyzing your current supply chain, the overall network in the system, understanding its limitations, and then creating a blueprint for a future supply chain that's a better fit for the environment and the challenges you're looking at. That's design in a nutshell. What design isn't is trying to run and manage your current supply chain better. There's a ton of decisions you got to make. Planning is one thing, design is another, and both are necessary.
They really are necessary. And we've been talking about, I feel like we've been talking about planning a lot. We haven't really shone the light on design that I think it kind of deserves, right?
Well, sure. I can't agree with you more strongly.
All right. So yeah. I've seen a bit of a rise in the conversations around design. Why do you think supply chain professionals, leaders are focusing on supply chain design now? Because also, like, we heard a lot about visibility. So it's kind of like supply chain visibility. Now I think there's a rise in conversations around supply chain design over visibility. I think that one starts first. I'm not sure, but talk to us about why that is and what's sort of driving the supply chain design adoption.
Sure thing. So these things are, the businesses are influenced strongly by history and the environment. And we had a few things happen over the last 5 years or so that really seized people's attention. Pandemic, globalization, land war in Europe, rising trade barriers, problems with China. All of these things have grabbed the attention and made it that you really had to focus on just getting through the day in some cases.
Mhm.
Design is very much about where am I going to be in the future? But in order to get to the future, you got to survive today. So the last few years has really been about trying to get a handle on things, just knowing where things are at, because things are changing so much. And then as we settle on out and we've kind of seen these massive environmental shifts they're clearly long term. And now we're in a phase where organizations are very aware that the environment has changed, but they are designed and operating systems from a pre-pandemic perspective.
Oh.
So when you're busy putting out fires, you don't really have the time to figure out, am I living in the right neighborhood? Now that they've got a little bit of leeway, it's this sweet spot because you've got a little bit of breathing room to look ahead at the future, but you also still have in memory what happened in the past. And we saw that a lot of problems are designed into the supply chain, that things that worked well 10 years ago are the same things preventing you from making breakthroughs now. So this is a window of opportunity to relook at the design of your supply chain and figure out where you need to be before that next crisis blows up.
It's so true. I'm glad you brought that up because I did talk a little bit about this sort of after the pandemic where, supply chain professionals didn't really have that room to breathe. They were still putting out fires. But I think you're right. We have that window of opportunity right now. And I think each supply chain is different. How do we want to design that? Where are we going to spend our risk dollars? There's so many things that we can take a look at. And obviously supply chain is, sourcing all the way to last mile. There's a lot to think about too. Now, before I get to Ryan, I just want to let you all know if you have any questions about supply chain design, now is the time to ask those questions. Make sure you put them in the comments. We're going to be watching those and we're going to be asking those questions as well, making sure that you get all of the information that you need from this particular episode. So Ryan, let's go to you. What's driven supply chain design adoption within C.H. Robinson?
Well, you talk about how it's grown over the last recently, right? And I used to ask myself, I've been doing supply chain design for 17 years now. And I used to ask myself, how are people making these decisions without doing supply chain design? Right?
Good question.
And now I think the profession, the competency is growing. People can handle the complexity. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's grown, right? For us at C.H. Robinson, we're mainly a transportation provider, one of the largest in the world. And we use it to help work with our customers to help make them better so that we can serve them better, so that they can be better. And it's one of those things that's very integrated with our customers. In some cases, that it's an expectation that we be able to help them at that very strategic level make those decisions. It does help us get from dealing with a dock manager and making a price-based decision on say, a given load, to helping them make strategic decisions and then looking at us more for that expertise rather than it just being a commodity.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to look at it holistically, like you said, instead of transactional. Because I think when it comes to logistics, sometimes we really do look at it transactional. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this later on. But broadly, how are you using supply chain design? I know you just gave us a little bit of an insight, but I'm sure there's more that you can share.
We cover a wide range of industries, right? And so it's really whatever our customers need. On a simple side, it can be things as simple as a center of gravity, or what if we add or remove a warehouse? Where should that be, right? So simpler questions as supply chain design goes. It can be far more complex things like looking at down to a production line level. What if we add a line? What if we've done different things where we're looking at different mixtures of line uses to optimize how goods are going off of the line. And it seems weird to use that for supply chain design, but as you're looking at utilizing those production locations, we've been able to figure out how to use the technology to help answer those questions. It can be inventory stacking questions. Do you have your A items at many locations and your B and C items at fewer locations? Improving service, all of the things. And we have to be able to use the technology to answer all of those different things for our customers.
Absolutely. Now, Sheik has a question that I do want to pull up because I think it's a really good time for us to ask this question. We don't have it as a part of what we're going to be talking about today. Don, who should be the stakeholders for the supply chain designing process?
Sure. So, I mean, this affects the entire business.
Yeah.
Most organizations have evolved now to have a point person for the supply chain responsibility as a whole. Often that's a VP of supply chain. Sometimes it's a chief supply chain officer. Sometimes it sits under the COO's office. And ultimately, the CEO, as I know very well, is responsible for everything that happens at the end of the day. So, really, the way I'll think about this, or the way I'd respond to that, is supply chain design is just another team as part of the supply chain organization. They call the plays, they make the blueprint that the planners and the executors are then going to have to live with. So the stakeholders are all around, the people who are going to run the supply chain, the people who are having problems with it now. And ultimately, supply chain design affects what you're going to do in the future and whether or not your company is going to survive. You know who those stakeholders are? Board members and the shareholders.
That's true. That's true. Ryan, do you have anything to add to that? Like what were the stakeholders within C.H. Robinson for that?
For that, it's really our team and our salespeople, right? It to Don's point, it's everyone, right? Because it's jobs at stake. So I think we've had customer service people from our customers involved. It's the sales, it's finance. Obviously, the finance people are very concerned with investment and inventory flow. And for us at C.H. Robinson, it's our commercial people understanding how we can help their customers and then articulating that to them.
Great question. Thank you, Don. Do you want to add something? Sure.
Yeah, I want to add one quick point on there because Ryan is spot on. It affects everybody, but we also don't want to, there is who are the stakeholders, but then who is accountable. And this is one of the biggest problems out there is just assuming design is going to take care of itself. You have to have a team, you have to have leaders, and you have to have them accountable for design results.
Yeah, such a great point. Now, I want to give a shout out to Sonia over on my personal LinkedIn. Thanks so much for joining us. So we know that supply chain design is important to modern business, but as I mentioned in the introduction, it requires that technology. And technology can be a bit of a sticking point, right? Some people have lots of technology within their tech stacks. It gets a little bit complicated. And so let's dive a little bit deeper into the thought process of a customer when they look at partnering with a new technology partner. I think the first half of the puzzle for the customer is, what should my business be doing? So Don, what are the fears or the top challenges customers anticipate when thinking about new tech?
So, everybody worries about looking bad.
Yeah.
By the time you're making this decision, you have a need, and no one wants to make the wrong decision because when you're choosing a vendor, it's a highly visible process. So a lot of times it's driven by, honestly, not wanting to make the wrong decision or forget something in the process. And it tends to drive these processes to focus on box checking exercises, on compare this list to this list, because those are sort of obvious clues about what the technology is. And, the technology is necessary, but it is not sufficient to be successful.
Yeah. Well, and I think also prioritization is really a struggle for a lot of leaders, supply chain professionals, because I think there's a lot of things that they want to do and they want technology to do for them. Where do we prioritize budgets? Where do we prioritize which technologies we invest in, right?
For sure.
So how do they prioritize that particular piece of technology? What questions should they be asking themselves to decide that supply chain design is that priority piece over maybe workflow streamlining or automated warehouses or maybe whatever that might be? Don?
Sure. So it is a strategy question here, these prioritizations. And the thing is, you don't really have a choice. You can't, you're suggesting that they're somehow stopping and not doing design. If you're not explicitly and intentionally doing design, design is just happening to you. You have a supply chain. It is changing as you make little modifications. The environment is changing. What happens is if you get a sense that I've got short-term needs that are going to derail me, it's going to be the priority. If I can't even, if I'm not managing my warehouse operations enough where I'm fulfilling my business needs, I'm not even going to be around till next year.
Mm-hmm.
So there are there are crises, there are fires. But in terms of prioritizing design should be and must be thought of as a constant process. You're always intentionally designing it. And design is also a little tricky because it's a little thing that the costs and the budgets to have a quality supply design process, they're not anywhere near most of these other technologies. They're niche, they're small. The technology fees are generally less than an FTE.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to pay attention to that little detail. It's not a big budget item, but it is the thing that might keep your company alive in 3 years. And failing to do it is the thing that might make you be destroyed or become an acquisition target.
Well, I like that you said that design will happen to you either way. Like,
It's
I've
happening.
never really thought about that because it's
Yeah.
happening anyways. And so what are we doing about it? And then also, supply chains are starting to become or have become a competitive advantage for a lot of businesses. And so
Right.
if you don't design it properly, then you're actually missing out on that competitive advantage and where you could be strategically in the market. So it's kind of a sort of a must have. It's not even on the prioritizing list, right? It needs to be
If you
right at the
care
top.
about your business being in business more than a few months from now, you have to be designing because, as you say,
Uh,
if you're not designing the supply chain, it's designing itself, and that's probably not going the way you want it to.
no, we need to have control over that
Intentionality.
design, intentional control. Ryan, I'm going to bring you in just a minute. I've got one more question for Don.
Mhm.
Is this where some of those trade-offs we mentioned in the introduction sort of come into play?
Oh,
Don?
absolutely. And then just to review, when we think about designing a supply chain, we're trading off. You mentioned cost, but I think more broadly, it's financial performance.
Okay.
You optimize the system for financial performance, but you can also optimize the system to maximize service, and you can also optimize it to minimize risk. If you can accomplish all of those things at the same time, you don't need to run the sort function on the darn Excel spreadsheet, right? These problems are tricky because there isn't one right answer. There is trading these things off. If you're not trading them off, easy peasy. But most of the time, you have to take a trade off. You're going to accept some lower financial performance
Mm-hmm.
because you want to lower some of the risk that you're dealing with. If you want to push that service level up, if you can do it with no financial effect, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, you're making an explicit trade-off about what that is. And I should say, most of the time, that trade-off is happening, but people don't know about it. They don't articulate it and think about it to say to the C-suite, this is where we're trading things off right now. Does this fit your strategy, sir or ma'am, for the next 3 to 5 years? Is this the right mix? If you want to break through over here, there's no such thing in free lunch in logistics, right? You got to give somewhere. So advising on the trade-offs and quantifying them, that's what professional designers like Ryan do.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that because a lot of times we're talking about internal collaboration, but we speak different languages. And we also talk about the right questions to ask ourselves when we're thinking about partnering with somebody or bringing in a new technology. But I think just as important as that, which is what you just said, is how are we going to express this to the C-suite in a language that everybody will understand on how it's going to help. So Ryan, I want to bring you into this. Don has shared a lot with us just now, some really great insights. Do you have anything that you want to add to that? And then talk to us through how you made the decision to partner with maybe Optilogic.
Sure. So I like to explain it to people that the investing in this, it will pay for itself if you're willing to make the decisions or act upon the output, right? That's what I see is people will run models and they'll see opportunity, but then they don't act on it. Then yes, it's a lost cause at that point. But if you're willing to make the investment and act on it, that's where you get the win. That's where it will pay for itself, sometimes in a matter of days and weeks. Us making that decision is, for C.H. Robinson, again, it's an expectation of our customers. We've set that we've set that expectation with them that we're going to be there to help them to get those real world executable results. The thing I tell people about is know the cost of your decision. As Don talks about the trade-offs of risk versus service versus transportation cost, warehouse cost, production cost. I tell people it's your decision, but know the cost of that decision. Know what those trade-offs are. Be informed.
Yeah, well, and I also think, ROI means different things to different people internally, right? It means something different to you and your teams, and then internally as you go up the chain. And ROI isn't necessarily always financial. If you can increase that competitive advantage for your business, that's an ROI that a lot of people like as well. So Ryan, I see your question. We're going to ask that question a little bit later on in the conversation. Don, I want to come back to you because the second half of deciding to work with a new partner is the partner themselves. What do customers typically look for in a partner? What does that look like?
Well, typically, I mean, these things are unfortunately sales-driven processes in many cases. So we have, there's Ryan and his team, and there's our scientists and engineers in our team, and between them, there's a procurement organization and a sales organization.
Yep.
And that is the way that these organizations have to kind of work and dance together to get that done, so you can get the teams together. During that process, procurement typically doesn't have to live with the results, other than living in the supply chain that Ryan's team is going to create. So you see a lot of focus on some really good and important things. What's the technology do? Give me some customer references. Show me some stories. There's a selling process in there, but it's only indicative. It's only a symbol or a representation of what's really going to happen later. And that part is really tricky. There's what it looks like in the initial discussion, and then there's all the stuff that happens after, and the years after the deal is the important part. So how do you get visibility into the long term? That is a really important question that we don't see a lot, actually.
Yeah, I was recently talking to a chief supply chain officer, and we were talking about technology partners and, some of the questions that they ask when they go in. And it was really interesting what he said, because he turned to the salesperson and was like, "You're here for today, but who's going to be my go-to moving forward?" So it was, right, Don?
It's so true.
Yeah.
And that is, cultural fit between a technology vendor and a customer. When we talk about partnering, we sell and license software and technology, it's a sales event. As a company, is the sale a victory? We look at it that a sale is the beginning of a long-term relationship. It is the beginning of an opportunity to celebrate victories next year and the year after and the year after. And it's easy to see some people, it's just about the short term, but in design we think about the long term because that's our business.
So let's talk about the alignment, right? Do you think they're always looking for the right things? Does what they are looking for sort of align with what they should be looking for?
I would say hardly ever are hardly ever are companies looking for what I would be advising them to think about. And I said it up front. Cultural fit, the people side of it. The technology has been around for decades, and there's new things, new breakthroughs going on all the time. But people have been designing these systems explicitly pretty much since Alexander the Great started talking logistics back in about 300 BC or so. You can still read about it.
Is that true?
That is true. There's a great book on my bookshelf, The Logistics of Alexander's Macedonian Army and the Campaigns.
Okay.
So, I mean, military's been at this longer than just about anybody.
Okay.
And this is explicit, when we talk about managing it and identifying it as a process. But to bring it back around, are they looking at the right things? Technology is important, but it's so bright and shiny, we focus on this too much. And people and the cultural fit, that's the part that's really going to determine whether things work. And we tend to spend the least amount of time on it. I will say that the savviest companies that are out there The leaders involved, they have an intuition in a sense for this. And they'll say, I just don't feel right about this vendor. You know
Huh.
what? Trust that feeling.
So, Ryan, I want to bring you in just really quickly. When you
Sure.
first went into this, did it sort of change for you as to how you were looking at it, how you were thinking about it? Talk to us through sort of what that looked like for you.
Yeah. So again, for CH Robinson, we've been doing supply chain design in some way, shape, or form for over 20 years as an organization. It predates my involvement with this team. But what we're really looking for as we develop relationships, as we're picking a provider, is um, concisely functionality. Can it do what we need to do? We're looking for a wide range. Like I said, we're dealing with a lot of different industries, a lot of different modes of transportation, lots of different questions. Can it functionally do it? And we get demos. We may get to test it for a little bit and things like that. But to Don's point, a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year in, 2 years in, when there's a bug, because all software is going to have a bug, when we can't figure out how to do something, which doesn't happen a lot. My team's pretty strong, but when we need that assistance, is the support reliable?
Yeah.
How is it going to integrate into our organization? And the biggest thing is continuous improvement and evolution.
Absolutely. All really great points. So Don, I want to ask you, are there any sort of red flags that we should be looking out for so we know not to maybe move forward with a partner, or maybe, sometimes we don't listen to our gut, but maybe there are some things that we need to, listen out for in some of those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing would be, if you're talking in the context of vendor selection, if they're not talking about the support and they're not talking about the team, if you can't meet anybody but the salesperson, if all you ever get to do is see a canned demo of the software, those should really worry you. The first time you start working with the software from a vendor, it can't be after the procurement event is done. That's crazy, because it's too late. You can't take that clunker back and turn it in, right? You can't undo these procurement processes very easily. We're in an environment now where people need to be able to verify and try things before they buy them. That's just where we're at. But enterprise software hasn't caught up to that. And to me, that's a huge red flag. You should know exactly what you're getting yourself into. On the people side, the biggest thing that I see is some of these folks come in and they're chest pounding about how smart they are. They use big fancy words. They serve up a hot steaming bowl of word soup. And they're like, tasty word soup. Try this. No, don't try that. If your vendor, if your partner is using words that are confusing, if they're telling you these big concepts and you're like, wait, what was that again? They say, oh, well, we know better than you. They're not acting as a partner. It doesn't matter what the vendor knows. It matters what they're going to do to help you and what you're going to end up knowing. It has to all be about you, the customer. If it is not about helping you get to your goals, you get where you want to be, there's the door.
You're a wordsmith, Don. A bowl of word soup, and then you've got cosmic frog and all sorts of things. I love it.
Got to have some fun with this thing, right?
So you talked about them coming to the table with, big concepts. What about startups that are coming with big brand names? Are customers enticed by that? Like, what do tech providers have to look like?
I'll comment this, because I've been in the supply chain and logistics field since before it was called supply chain. And we have a problem in the logistics and supply chain field, which is we have a need and an interest in innovation, but we're in the business of moving real stuff around. Like, it's not bits and bytes. It's not emails.
It could be life-saving.
Product. It's life-saving, things that people eat, things that people build buildings out of. Stuff goes really wrong when we get it wrong in the logistics field. Okay. Factories stop working. And we in the supply chain industry know this, and it makes us be really conservative in general about how we tackle these things. We're very careful. And at the same time, we want the innovation. So, how we see this play out all the time where people are really wanting breakthroughs, and maybe some of these small companies are the ones that have made a great breakthrough. But at the same time, there's a natural conservatism that the people who drive real trucks around and fly planes, we matter, we can never lose that thought. So, my recommendation is, and one of the observations I've made over the years is that the way to solve this is we who make this technology have to respect, understand, and honor the past. We have to know the classical techniques. You can't just tell somebody, oh, we've made an AI breakthrough, we don't need optimization anymore. If you're so darn good, you ought to be pretty good at optimization. Solve the classical problems well, and then build innovation. Another way to say it is get innovation from companies that will come to you and work the way you work now, and then bring innovation so you can absorb it at your pace. Supply chain organizations want innovation, but they have to control the uptake of it.
Yeah.
And that means you got to have it both ways: conservative, traditional methods, and pushing forward.
It's so true, because I was talking to somebody the other day as well who was in a room with supply chain leaders. And one of the number one things they said was how overwhelmed they are by the technology that's out there. And they don't want to make a wrong, bad decision.
Yeah.
And so, there's two sides of that coin, right? We need to be able to have the safe space to be able to try and make the decisions. And, it might work, it might not. But also, like you said, we got to meet everybody where they are in this moment. So
we do. Sarah, if you as a customer or a buyer are confused and overwhelmed by the technology, that's not your fault. It's the vendor's fault.
Okay.
If you're confused and they start throwing all the lingo at you and they start trying to slick hand wave you, that's not your fault. That's that vendor's fault. Make them back up and explain it more simply. Use fewer words, single syllables if you can. Do it again. Is it about you, or is it about the vendor sounding smart? The people use intimidation tactics, the sort of, I'm going to blow by you, and that should bug you, because you are smart enough to understand this technology. You don't have to know how it was coded, but you do have to know simply, how does it work? What does it do? And what doesn't it do? And if a vendor won't tell you those things in a way you understand, bounce them out of that room.
Get out of the word soup and start using the letters. I think did I do it, Don?
Love it.
I think I did it, Don. All right, Ryan, we're bringing you back into this conversation. And also, if anybody has any questions, make sure you put it in the comments, because we really want to make sure that we get to your questions. And then we've also got some really great resources in the comments as well. So go check those out, click on the links, go see what we've got for you there. Now, Ryan, you spoke earlier about what you sort of look for in a tech partner. What do you expect those partners to have in place to maybe even consider working with them?
In place, we're looking, are they going to be around, right? That relationship. Don hit on it with the culture part of it, right? Are we going to mesh? Are we going to be there to help each other out? And like I said, functionality, I can't understate enough in development to be forward thinking. What's the next thing we need to be able to make better? How can we make the tool more efficient? Things like that. And I need to be able to go to my customers and say, hey, this is an industry leading tool. I'm standing behind it. We're putting our brand on it.
Yeah.
And therefore we need our customers to be able to trust that as well. And because if you don't trust the tool, if you don't trust the inputs, you're not going to trust the outputs. And therefore you're not going to, again, going back to that acting on it. Is it reliable? And then again, the support and the collaboration. Somebody that's going to listen to us and take that feedback, as some of these organizations that we've worked with have grown in the past, they seem to listen a lot less than they did when they were smaller in the beginning. And that is a huge impact, to be able to listen to us and say, here's something that can be better, and then act upon that.
Yeah. So, and let's get back to talking about trade-offs, right? What are some of the risks of working with a new partner? How do those, stack up against the risks of not deciding, or deciding not to embrace supply chain design?
Yeah, well, change is hard, right? As we were changing tools, I was concerned about my team morale And obviously the risk to our customers. Are we going to be able to serve them? We have timelines that we've promised to them to give results so that they can act upon them. They've got leases coming up. They need to make decisions, right? So
Yeah.
Those are the risks. Again, we get back to that question: will it do what they said it was going to do, and be able to do all the things that we're expecting and asking of it? Is the training there? We put a lot of time into making sure that the ending of our contact with our previous provider, the training of Cosmic Frog, and then being able to have that access, that all had to be put together to make sure that it worked out so that our people could continue to serve our customers. And then is that partner going to be around for years, or are they looking to make a quick buck and sell out pretty soon? Things like that.
Yeah. Now, Don, Ryan just mentioned it again. I've mentioned Cosmic Frog. For people who out there who doesn't know what Cosmic Frog is, can you just tell them?
Sure. Cosmic Frog is our industry-leading supply chain design product. It's called Cosmic Frog because we love the image of a little frog with his bug eyes, looking at all the possible futures that are out there, being able to see them really clearly so you can choose which future you're going to move into.
You and your animals and you and your words. I love it. All right.
Gotta
Don,
have fun.
You've been in the industry a long time. You've seen a lot of these pitfalls firsthand. I know you've been very intentional on how Optilogic has evolved. So how have you sort of broken through some of these fears, managed some of these risks, developed ways to overcome these common objections and pitfalls?
Well, the thing of it is you can't do any of that overnight. It takes a long time to build a reputation. And that is the challenge of any startup. And we're really, really lucky. Many of the folks at Optilogic have already done decades of work at some of the leading companies that are out there in the past. And so we weren't starting from scratch there, but still we have to prove it over and over every day. And it starts, we said something up front. We said every customer has to feel like they are basically our only customer, and every project has to succeed. You can't have the failures. Mm-hmm. And, that's only as you grow and you get more and more customers. That's great because then you can leverage the knowledge and you've got a bigger community to serve. But you can't get so big for your britches that you're not remembering that it starts and ends with an individual user having a moment of truth with the software that you're putting out there. Mm-hmm. And we talk about that every day. Ryan mentioned about the sort of algorithms and innovation. We spend a bunch of time thinking about, can we eliminate 2 or 3 button clicks on this user interface? Mm-hmm. What bugs us? What annoys us? Because those annoyances also build up and make you a little more miserable, a little more hesitant to work with it. That kind of innovation that is truly user-centric. If you're just trying to collect some money and move on, you just don't care about that. Yeah. We care deeply about this. This is our field. We've helped to build it and take it forward. And no success happens without Ryan and his team and all the rest of our great customers being successful. We don't have any success if they don't win.
And you're avoiding that resentment down the road by making sure that you eliminate all those clicks. I love it because everybody, who doesn't like a one click? You know what I mean?
For sure.
So Ryan, I want to get into your journey into supply chain design. Before you started to focus on supply chain design, what did your supply chain look like? Like what did everything look like? What were some of the challenges you were facing that you were like, I need to focus on supply chain design?
Well, that goes back to we had this as a competency before I started. So there really isn't a before for me. Okay. We have it set up now. What I've done over the last 17 years as I've been a part of this team is you've talked about how it's grown in the industry. It has just become an expectation of our customers. I have customers that we have a dedicated person that's doing this for them every day, answering their questions, and that's how they function. That's how they set up their strategy. And really it's introducing new customers to that, right? To build out and answer their questions, show them that value we talked about earlier, get them down that journey of understanding the trade-offs and that the investment will pay for itself as they make those decisions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And before I ask you the next question, I just want to say to Olay, I see your question. We are going to get to that in just a minute. So, how did you sort of recognize the importance of supply chain design in your digital transformation?
Sure. For us, like I said earlier, how are people not doing it?
Mm-hmm.
It's I keep coming back to the customer, and I'm sorry, it's a simple solution. I don't like to overcomplicate, over-engineer things.
Mm-hmm.
It's how do people operate their supply chains without being able to answer those questions, knowing the what ifs. As Don has talked about, being able to look into the impacts of different decisions and just knowing those trade-offs. That's what's key.
Sarah, can I jump in on one
Yeah.
quick comment here? I want to highlight this for everybody. C.H. Robinson and Ryan are some of the leaders in this field. They're what we would call the technology leaders. But the way I want you to notice the way he's talking about design, he's not talking about once every year we do an exercise or we're going to do a 3-year. They've so embedded the notion of what if analysis into the culture. That is design, but it's happening all the time. It could be, what if I change this and I can operate differently next week? It's change enablement. It lets them figure out how to make changes real time without risking the operation. And, C.H. Robinson and Ryan have internalized this concept. So for them, design is just looking ahead and making changes to the network. That is an incredibly powerful capability. How do you survive without it? I don't know.
Well, and think about it like adjustments, right? Like micro adjustments here and there. You hear about it in other industries, right? And you're also thinking about internally, you're thinking about externally. And so if this adjustment, we turn it to the left, let's look at it as a dial, right? We turn it to the left. What's it going to do before we actually put it into play and implement that? So Ryan, I want to ask you really quickly, how did you find Optilogic? Like what was your process of identifying, vetting, and engaging with a new tech provider? Because this is something that I think a lot of leaders or professionals struggle with.
Yeah, I'll start with saying we had a tool that was very evolved. We were very happy with. We were very strong users of it. We were faced with a very large price increase from them, and we had noticed over the years that the service, that user support wasn't what it used to be. The development had slowed a bit, so we weren't completely satisfied. And then on top of that, we're getting this big price increase. Fortunately, as we're realizing, because as I've said earlier, we have to offer this service to our customers. It's just become an expectation. Fortunately, about the time I'm trying to figure out how I can tell my superiors about this large price increase, it came back to relationships. Some people from Optilogic reached out and said, hey, we got something we think you'd be interested in taking a look at. There were others from other organizations about the same time were reaching out. And we're like, well, this is wonderful. The timing was perfect. Our contract's coming up. We're facing this big price increase. Now we're aware of all of this competition. We can evaluate. So we started going down a kind of a normal procurement process. And, Don talked earlier about the procurement people getting involved. I remember the last time we bought software, it was 2008, I believe. We did the evaluations just within our team, and I got all the contracts and everything done, and I had legal review it. And I walked up to the chief commercial officer and I said, here, sign this. He said, did legal review it? And I said, yep. And he signed it. And it was that simple for us, right? Now procurement's involved and it's not quite that simple anymore. And I know those people have a role and a function and there's a reason they exist. But it made it more difficult for us and it took a bit more time. But we did go through the process and they did get us to think about some things that we should have, right? So it was good stuff there. But we did the demos with providers. We did some testing, and the big question for us was, can we replicate what we're doing? Can we continue to keep the lights on with this new technology? We wanted a seamless, easy transition. I talked about earlier about the risk, right? So those were two of the key things. And then again, that future development to prove out that they would be an industry leader. So those were the types of things we were looking for outside of the procurement things like, does it meet the security requirements and all of that?
So I want to talk about outcomes because I also know that we've got a couple of questions from the audience that we want to take as well. So let's get into outcomes. And I spoke about ROI a little bit earlier. It means different things to different people. So Ryan, can you share maybe the benefit or ROI that you've seen through working with or on this journey with Optilogic?
Yeah, like I said, again, I hate to keep saying it, but it really comes back to how do you not? It pays for itself if you're willing to act on the results. So if you have somebody you trust operating the software, within your team, using it appropriately, starting with good data, but then trusting the output, it will pay for itself. There's going to be challenges, there's going to be pain, but if you're willing to act upon it, it will pay for itself. The investment's worth it.
Awesome.
Sarah, one of the
Yeah,
problems we have in this industry, and kind of what Ryan's getting at, is how do you quantify a road not taken?
That's true.
A lot of
Well,
times
that's
you're
kind of why
saying,
I'm asking about the ROI, right?
I tried this, let's not do that because I modeled it on out, and that's a really bad idea. What's the ROI for avoiding a disruption or not making a bad decision? We have trouble quantifying that.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the costs of the technology and the number of people compared to the actual upside, it just dwarfs it. Nobody's trying to figure out how to charge millions and millions of dollars. Well, some people did. In general, the investment that it requires to get a good supply chain design practice going is tiny. If any one of these things pays off, it pays off for the whole thing.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily, would you say, the ROI that people should be looking at from a supply chain design implementation or software isn't necessarily financial? What else should it be? What else should they be focusing on as to what that ROI is?
Well, for me, it's existential. I mean, ROI means I laid out this cash and then I measure the financial returns. But to do a proper analysis, how do you analyze the ROI of risk reduction? There is a way to do it financially where you model on out. If I hadn't used this software, I would have made this change and then service would have plummeted and then my transpo last mile costs would have gone up. Nobody really goes on out to model that on out because by the time you're thinking about it, you've moved on to the next one.
Right.
So the question is, does investment in design technology pay off? Well, all of the companies that are pushing supply chain excellence have supply chain design practices. So either they're wrong or they know something.
Well, it's kind of a shoulda, coulda, woulda scenario, right?
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Ryan, do you have any learnings from this process that you want to share with us?
Sure. For us, like I said, have a plan in place as you're making a change. Have that plan in place. Prepare. Understand there's going to be hiccups. It's not perfect. The big thing is, sorry, one second. Get the right person in it. Somebody that loves making an impact, and keep them busy using the tool. If you get a strong user that stays in that seat and uses it consistently, that's how you get the value out of it. It doesn't need to be a technical person, right? Like a lot of people on my team, they're not coders, they're not data scientists. They're people that understand the business and have learned to use the tool because the tool is simple enough that you can do that, but you need to understand the impacts. Right. And so I think that's the key. That's where I hire people that understand supply chain. I don't hire coders for my team to do these things.
Yeah, such great advice and such a great learning or takeaway. So going back to the ROI, Don, I'm going to start with you and finish with Ryan. How can organizations translate what we're talking about today into competitive advantage in 2024? Because I spoke about it earlier, right? We should be looking at our supply chains as a competitive advantage. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, for sure. So, there's only how many months left in 2024? So you're talking about how can we get the impact in the next 6 or 7 months, right? We're going to have short-term impacts, but we're also trying to sort out what are we doing in 2025 and 2026. If you've got supply chain design and you're working these projects this year, you're going into 2025 with ideas and a plan. You're going in a direction, and you know there are certain events, elections and things that are going to go one way or the other, and things are going to happen. You've got to be prepared for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you think ahead? You know, for me, the payoff is you get to the end of this year and you're not afraid of what's going to happen. You're actually looking, saying, as I get data, I've got contingencies and I'm going to outperform my competitors. They're not going to keep up because I've already designed ahead and I know they haven't.
You're translating that fear into let's do this thing.
Heck
right,
yeah.
Don?
Absolutely.
I love the excitement. All right, Ryan.
Sorry, what was the question?
Oh, the question was around competitive advantage in 2024. How does
Oh,
this
yeah. Well, to
translate
Don's
for you?
point, yeah, it's being able to operate your business. You know, an example I would give, if it's okay, years ago, I did a project for a customer. They're doing a major promotion at restaurant chain around the country. And after they started it, they didn't have enough supply to keep up with the demand. The promotion was so successful, and we were able to model so that they could continue the promotion, right? So it, as you guys have said, it's that opportunity cost. It doesn't have to be a cost savings. It can be a growth thing. How do we deal with it?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes things are better than, you know, we've talked about risk, but sometimes things are better than you expected. And there's that risk of not being able to continue or not being able to grow fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people will come to us and say, hey, our organization has grown and we've just made all these decisions without knowing why. Now, how do we fix it? So it many times is a good thing. It's not just about cost savings. It's about those good decisions going forward and knowing the impacts of them.
Such a great point. I have one last question for both of you, which I will ask you in just a minute because I want to get to our audience questions. So Ryan asks, given the crazy challenges from the past few years, do you see an intentional shift in design strategy priorities and goals that moves away from just in time, which felt like the standard for so long, to be more priority on buffers to absorb uncertainty? Have strategies changed across different industries? Don, did you want to take that one?
I mean, I'll start with it. The answer is absolutely yes. When things aren't changing and you have long lead time supply chains, but you get reliable performance, and I'm talking about China here. I'm old enough to remember when people were evaluating the opportunities of moving their supply base to China.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got used to regular, steady transportation. We could model the uncertainty with a probability distribution. We know what the transit times are going to be. And when you do that, you can squeeze and operate with finer margins and reduce your buffers.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is you design for that system. And then when the system changes, you're designed, incorrectly. You're designed to suffer and to have high risk. That's exactly what's happened here. So companies know that, but it takes a while because they're still operating the way they did back in the sort of 20 years of global consensus from 2020 to 2018 and 2020.
Yeah.
So yes, people are really looking at this, but making those changes, you just don't know if it's going to work or not. That's why you've got to model it out.
Great. Ryan, anything to add to that?
I agree with Don completely. Unfortunately, I would say also there are those organizations that, with a stock market driven world that are more concerned about hitting numbers for a quarter or a year rather than that good ongoing approach. The right organizations, most of those engaged in supply chain design, are thinking longer term. Unfortunately, I still do see some that are more worried about hitting numbers for a quarter or a year. And that's what we have to get away from. We have to start being able to think beyond that and model beyond that.
Yeah. All right. Last question. Olay says, how do you deal with the traceability of products coming from places prone to natural disasters? Don, did you want to take this one?
Well, traceability ends up being really an execution and visibility problem. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of organizations that aren't even sure where their suppliers are. So for us, from a design perspective, I would highly encourage you to get looking at and understanding what is your multi-echelon supply chain. As for traceability, we don't do that. I would recommend you get a good vendor.
But you need design first, I think, right?
You have to have design along with execution and planning for sure.
All right. So finally, then, whether it's what to look out for in the rest of 2024 or maybe the first steps to embracing supply chain design, can you each give me one key takeaway from today that you'd like everybody to walk away with thinking about, maybe taking action on? Don, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. I will reflect again what Ryan was talking about with how C.H. Robinson is using design, not just for strategy, but to enable change at all levels. People still have a misconception that design is the occasional one-off. When you embed the ability to change, you don't fear change. You look at change as opportunity. It's a huge, huge cultural and strategic point, and Ryan and C.H. Robinson have absorbed that. It's business changing.
Great. Ryan, what's your one takeaway?
I'd say first, thanks, Don. I appreciate the comments.
Of course.
I would say use it. These types of tools can be used in so many different ways to solve so many questions. Don't put it in a box and think of it. It can only be used to do this. If you get creative and you learn how to use it appropriately and get the full benefits from it, it's almost limitless what you can attack and try to model within it to solve lots of different problems.
Awesome. Well, just a friendly reminder that we've got lots of really great links to resources in the comments. We'll also be sending the link to this recording as well as those links to each of you that click the attend button. But that brings us to the end of today's session. As always, Don, when I talk to you, we could carry on all afternoon. There was so much more we could have covered, but I guess we'll have to do it again soon. And Ryan, thank you so much for your insights. It's great to hear about supply chain design from, a logistics company, a 3PL, somebody like C.H. Robinson, but it really puts everything into perspective when we can hear how you've been through that process and sort of the real life, conversations that you've had, the benefits that you've seen, all of that. And so if you want to find out how Optilogic could help you find a better way to design your supply chain, head over to optilogic.com. Make sure you check out Cosmic Frog. I just love that name. And so thank you all for listening, watching, commenting, submitting your questions. We couldn't do these LinkedIn Lives without you. So we appreciate you and hope you took a lot of insight and inspiration from today's discussion. We'll see you again soon. Ryan and Don, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sarah.